To the MENA representation in the industry panel. My name is Sarah Fatemi. My My pronouns are that bitch. I am a stand-up comedian, actress, writer, producer. I am of Iranian descent, and I will be moderating this panel today.
Woo! Hi, my name is Jasmin Ghasiri. I am also a multi-hyphenate actor, writer, producer. I am leaning into getting more into the production side of things, and also getting more into musical theater as my voice is so. I'm trans, so I went from being a mezzo to a tenor, which was a whirlwind of an adventure. And I'm Persian, Iranian as well. I feel like we segregated ourselves.
Yeah, right. You've taken over.
We've taken over. It's just the Persian panel plus Esraa.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Yeah, so happy to be here. And thank you all for showing up to this ungodly hour on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I am Kaveh, Taherian, he, him. I am an illustrator, writer, podcaster, and sometimes filmmaker.
Woo!
Yeah, thank you. Is that it? What else are we supposed to say?
Your background?
My background? Is that relevant in a panel like this?
I don't know.
I'm also Iranian, yes.
Woo! Hi, I'm Esraa Darwish. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an assistant director. I'm Egyptian and Muslim. That's my background.
Hi everybody, good morning. My name is Jasmin. I go by Jasmin Joestar online. I am, since this is the MENA representation panel, I am Iraqi Muslim Shia, and I'm very proud of who I am, and I make sure to say that at every chance I get to show that we are here and we are part of this pop culture world.
I'm also Muslim Shia. Okay, I'm so excited to get this started, you guys. First question, are you okay?
I feel like we've demonstrated that we're not.
Yeah, we should. No. no, and on a serious note, no. I don't know if you guys have been following what's been happening in the world, but after being out of work for 7 months with the writer's strike and the actor's strike, I definitely feel a little anxious about returning to work. I think, like, I've been talking about it, and just being like Muslim and Arab and working in entertainment, there's definitely this feeling that I might not get hired because of who I am. And it's not a new feeling, but it's definitely something I'm feeling right now, especially with like the hate crimes that have been happening in the country. Yeah. And then watching agents at CAA, which is the biggest talent agency in the country, lose their job for saying anything remotely political. Watching cast members on like massive franchises lose their jobs. I'm kind of like, I'm just an AD. So it's something like I've talked to other ADs about, and I'm really thankful that there are like a lot of other ADs of color that I know, because I'm hoping that they'll give me a job. But it's totally like frankly a fucked up time that we're living in, not just personally but career-wise. So yeah, I'm not okay.
I'm also not okay.
Oh, good.
I don't know when things are ever okay, but Sarah and I were talking about this on the Zoom before, but considering all, yes, not my wife Sarah, the other Sarah. Many times, yes. It's very important. Yes, considering the geopolitical moment that we're in and the collective trauma that everyone's experiencing, it's also extra crazy for us considering what has been happening in Iran for the past year and a half. So there's like a whole lead up of at least a year and a half of seeing fucked up shit every day, all the time, and forcing yourself to compartmentalize it in order to do your job as best as you can. So considering what's happened in the past few months, it's like felt like an extra boulder being put on top of your back of having all this other trauma that you've been carrying around regardless. So I think culturally we're probably all pretty good at compartmentalizing, which is probably not a good thing, but it's somewhat out of necessity and it's somewhat unavoidable. But this past year in particular, I feel has been like extra heavy about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's exhausting seeing so much happen that you don't have like control over. Like if you feel like so insignificant that you can help. Like you can do what you can. There's a lot of important things, whether it's amplifying on social media, donating what you can, just having conversations with people who may not understand, or having conversations who are, you know, your people to be there to support. But I felt like on the from the entertainment side, since you know that's what our panel focuses on, I was starting to feel like good about where representation was going for MENA people. Like we're still so underrepresented. We're really left out a lot of those conversations when it comes to diversity and like entertainment, film, creative, etc. And it was like nice that we weren't being like so like, oh look, we terrorists. And I don't know. I guess I'm given the hate crimes, you know, like in just like the sentiment and stuff. I am worried that we might backslide or like flip into like, oh, there's more roles for us, but now we have to, you know, be the, like constantly villainized. So it's a weird time, and also this is the first time I've looked as Middle Eastern. Before I transitioned, I was like, my tea did not make me not blonde, testosterone, but like I'm now like more visibly Middle Eastern, which has been interesting. Like the tea has really been like, oh, you're half Persian, we're gonna make you furry, you know? So I think this is like the first time outside an airport I've been, you know, kind of like I now am visibly not necessarily as white presenting or passing as I was in the past. So that's also just on like a personal level, especially then being a man on top of it. So I've been, now this isn't about being trans, but it's interesting going from like, I now have seen how women can look at me as the perpetrator or that kind of thing, so that's flipped. So it's interesting.
So you're twice as scary now.
I'm twice as scary. So it's interesting, and I've just been tired for like 5 months, so that's what
I don't think there's been a state where we would be okay, but I think I'm gonna flip it and say that the silver lining this time around with everything that's happening is that the world is kind of awakening to what has been happening in our world, and they have shown us humanity in that sense, where they're actually looking at us and we're not just, you know, the big bad wolf or the other or a subhuman, but there are people rallying for us, there are people standing up for us, there are people recognizing what has been happening and have been awakening to not just speaking, you know, strictly about what's happening right now with Palestine. You know, it's a daily struggle for 75 years. They know that now. And so for that, the very silver lining, I am grateful that the world has awakened and has recognized who we are, and that we are a people, and that we deserve just as much pursuit of liberty, happiness, and justice as everybody else. And for that, I know we're gonna be okay.
I felt that way with the Woman Life Freedom Movement in Iran. It was really nice to see people finally being able to separate the Iranian people from their government, and we also had a lot of people stand with us, and it, you know, I mean, I didn't answer my own question. I wasn't okay, I had to switch my antidepressants, but I think just having the support of other MENA creators, I think we're all gonna be okay. Okay. First question. So growing up, we see a lot of things that end up modeling our ideas when we're adults. For example, your parents' relationship is going to influence how you feel about the other. So what was your earliest view? I already talked about it. What was, sorry, are there kids here? What was your first MENA representation that you saw in the industry that helped you basically influence what you do?
I think it's Aladdin. I think I think all of us were like, it's Aladdin. I think Aladdin was the very first time where I got to see somebody like me and my name as well. And so that was pretty cool. And being called Princess Jasmin, not that great all the time. That being the only character, it's not somebody I really relate to as like personality wise, but it was good to have that one victory or that one thing where it's just like, oh, you're Middle Eastern, what is that? And you're like Princess Jasmin, like, oh, okay, cool. So like at least as a child and in middle school, you know, kind of growing up, trying to, when you're speaking about who you are or what your culture is, you're able to have that as a point of reference. So I think for me, that would be it, and then it explains why I grew up to love Disney so much and become a Disney creator.
Yeah, Aladdin. I also feel lucky that the sequels are actually good because you know what I mean. A lot of the Disney sequels were not very good, but Aladdin, we have like some 3 solid movies, which was really like fantastic. And I also realized, because I mean, I've been getting back into musical theater. I just finished my show. I have another one, and I can play Aladdin. and I was looking up to double check if like he's shirtless and all them, because I will be a very trans Aladdin with my scars. But on the other hand, I was like, I didn't see a single like middle Eastern like playing Aladdin or Jasmin on stage. So it's one of those things where I'm like, I can be the first. I don't want to be the first. I hate that it's like it's 2024 and like potentially I could be the first like actual Middle Eastern Aladdin. Wow, misgendering myself while there's like a celebrity coupling. But yeah, it was Aladdin for me.
I'm a little bit older than everybody. Although I do remember Aladdin being like a significant thing in my childhood. But I'm a child of the 80s, and a lot of people who probably won't even remember this, but there was a movie called Not Without My Daughter.
Oh, God.
So the short version of it is Sally Field plays this woman. It's based on a true story where she marries this Iranian man, played by Alfred Molina in brownface, by the way. Dr. Octopus from the Spider-Man movies.
I've worked with him, he's lovely.
He's a nice guy, I'm sure. This is a different time, but basically the story is she's married to this guy, and he's like, we're gonna go to Iran in the 80s and visit family with your kid, and they're like, great. And then they go there, and all of a sudden he's like, I lost my job, we're gonna live here now. I'm gonna possess you and control everything. And the whole movie becomes about Sally Field trying to escape this backwards ass country with everybody who's insane and trying to kill her the whole time. So that was my first foray into representation on screen.
Funny is, so my mom is like a white blonde lady, not her fault, whoever, but there was, I think, something that happened in the news where someone, or maybe it was that movie, but she was asked by people if people were worried that my dad would take me back to Iran, and she was like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's wild.
I think, I'll say a different one. I mean, obviously Aladdin, although Aladdin has its own history. Aladdin wasn't Aladdin until like the Muslim Public Affairs Council got involved and told Disney they couldn't call us barbaric. And so they're like, huh?
With the live action?
I mean, they worked on the live action, but originally there was like an Arab doctor who like stepped in and was like, really? So the theatrical release of Aladdin, the opening song is completely different to the one that got released on VHS, because it was like to cut off your nose and ears or something.
It's barbaric, but we call it home or something.
Cut off your ears if you don't like your face.
That's what it is, yeah. So it was, so there was a learning curve there. But I guess I'll say The Mummy. I think The Mummy was like, being Egyptian, everywhere I go, everyone's like, Brendan Fraser. And it's so interesting, like, I loved the movie as a kid, and then watching it again as I'm older, I'm like, why are the only people who die Egyptian? Like, literally only the white people survive that movie.
Oh, but remember, Jonathan, the whitest British man on the planet, he's half Egyptian.
Oh, that's right, yes. Yeah, totally. Because that's how genetics work.
Mine would be actually the movie Help, which came out in the 60s. I'm not that old, but I used to be obsessed with the Beatles for some weird reason. It was like a bonding thing between me and my dad. But basically the movie Help is about the Beatles. Okay, first of all, it's pretty, it wouldn't fly today. Let's just say that. It follows like, they describe it as an Eastern group. They don't specify religion or race, but it's pretty obvious. Oh, and it's all played by white people in brown face, which really looks more like orange face. And they basically chase Ringo, the drummer, around the world, trying to sacrifice him to get that ring off. But I will say it influenced what I do. Wait, you guys haven't seen it?
There's a lot of villain origin stories.
Yeah. But the character that inspired me was the princess, who kind of has a romantic relationship with one of the Beatles. And I always kind of not modeled my career, but I was like, I want to be that when I grow up. Like, I want to be the cool, badass white woman in Middle Eastern phase who helped save the day with the Beatles, you know? Yeah, her name was Eleanor Braun, but yeah, that was my MENA exposure. And also, to add on to that question, did you guys have any non-MENA influences growing up? Like you know,
Learned a lot.
want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I saw Edward Scissorhands and I was like, that's what I want to be. No, but seriously, it was a movie about a guy who, like, I mean, he was a complete outcast and he was incomplete, right? That's his story, is that he never felt like a full person and everyone treated him like he wasn't a full person. And growing up being like the only brown person in a completely white town, that's definitely what it felt like. It's interesting because that's where all the hate crimes are happening. It's not funny. But yeah, for me it was the movie I saw and I was like, God, I feel like that guy. And then it was like, oh, I really want to make movies. I want to be a filmmaker, because if I can feel like that, if I can feel less alone after seeing this freak, I'm like, yeah, I want to do that for someone else.
Not to be basic, but I saw Godfather pretty young. I was probably about 12 when I saw Godfather 1 and 2. And I remember very distinctly, that was like the first time I saw a movie that was about like, oh, this is a person whose parents are from somewhere else. And like, they have a whole thing where like, the dad grew up here, or didn't grow up here, he came over here on the ship and like did this whole thing. And it's about this kid trying to like, live up to the expectations of his father. And like, the music kind of has like I don't know if we're gonna call it like, not an Eastern flair, but it kind of has like these minor half notey kind of things. Like, so, and it's dark, and it's, you know, the Italians are kind of like similar culturally to us, like it's very family oriented, so I guess we would call it Middle Eastern coded now, is sort of what it is, but that was something I remember being like, oh, I didn't know you could do that in a movie and how movies work, and you know, again, I know I'm just like, it's a basic answer, but the immigrant thing I always feels like these days especially gets sort of left behind. Like that was basically the only thing until like, I don't know, 20 years ago. As far as like a really popular movie that had something that really showed that story that was, you know, everybody knew.
Yeah, that and Coming to America.
Oh, of course, yeah. Oh, that was a classic too, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like adventure movies, I love Indiana Jones. Mummy was a big one too. It's funny, my mom was obsessed with it, which I guess makes sense because she married a Middle Eastern man. But I think there's something about like, I mean, it was really confusing because I always identified with like Indiana Jones specifically, or like Brendan Fraser, and like it was one of those things where I'm like, people would be like, oh, girls can be tough too, but I'm like, no, there's something different. And it's interesting that like, because like, I wanted to act in those, like the big fantasy adventure, but there's like a fantasy element, right? And because you're taken out of the world, because not knowing I was trans at the time, being mixed, like my dad's an immigrant, my mom's not, so I felt like my whole life I've always lived in the in-between, and like my world doesn't exist anywhere. Like no one has this experience, which I'm sure is not true, which is why I want to make my own content, is because I know I don't want, it feels cheesy to say, but I don't want like another trans kid to feel the way I did growing up. Because it's really scary and very isolating. But on that note too, Haruka or Sailor Uranus from Sailor Moon, because in the manga they're actually canonically non-binary. And then when they did the first translation, they became sisters or cousins, which was weird as fuck. So, you know, but I rewatched it during the pandemic with like the correct like translation stuff, and I'm like, this is the fucking gayest show ever. It's so fucking trans and queer, it's like wild. But that I think was something where I really liked Haruka, because I think it was like, I kind of got it, where like, it was almost like they were forced to wear the sailor outfit, like for work, you know, and it's like putting on that like mask and then like coming out of it. So I feel like I had a lot of influences that like I've had, like the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, I identified it was so hard and people were like, why? And then I transitioned, I was like, oh, he's in the wrong body, that's why. You know? So it's been interesting unpacking.
Sailor Moon also, yeah, so I grew up a 90s kid, so Sailor Moon, Pokemon, and in terms of like real people, or more real, I guess, Mulan was one of my favorite Disney movies, Hercules, and then like in terms of like real movies, like non-animated things, Kill Bill, Rush Hour, Bad Boys. So I very much grew up like essentially a tomboy. Like even my favorite princess is like a warrior. So all those things help me continue to, I think, influence me to be proudly different than what, you know, people would be like, oh, you're Princess Jasmine. I'm like, no, I want to be a warrior. I want to kick ass. So that was my influence. Yeah, very, very 90s.
Once again, being that weird kid obsessed with old movies, my first influence was Shirley Temple. Made me want to be a performer, a chimpanzee who dances. Notice. And then, you know, I didn't see too much stand-up growing up, we're gonna save that for the next question. Okay. How have your lives and culture affected your art and your career?
Yeah, sure. I think everyone in sort of the MENA region, all of us have kind of one thing in common culturally, and it's very much like a storytelling oriented culture. We're very much like, you pass down your culture, who you are, your identity through the stories that you tell your kids. So coming from that background and holding sort of stories in high regard, like being the one brown kid in the neighborhood, like all I did was read. All I had were stories from where my parents were from like where I was born. So that I think goes hand in hand with wanting to be a filmmaker, is just, I want to tell these stories. I think it's so hardwired into us. And I think if anything, it gives us kind of an edge, because it's like we've been doing this for thousands of years. I think it's interesting kind of existing in the Western world and interacting with people who kind of only see history as like the last 200 years, and coming from a place that is 5,000 years old. So I think it's made me a more interesting person. And it's inspired me to try and like express that, you know, like, especially being Egyptian, my people didn't die out, they didn't get erased. It's the same guys who built the pyramids, do you know what I mean? I feel like we've kind of been removed from our own stories, and so it's imperative for me to come into filmmaking or any kind of storytelling and say, no, this is who we are, we've been here, you don't get to tell our stories for us. And I think that's so important, because we live in a world where if you don't tell people who you are, they'll tell you who you are.
Yeah. Well put.
I think in terms of what influenced me growing up in our family and all that, I think it's always strange to me when people are like in politics, and I feel like, you know, my family's from Iran. Anybody who's born here, it's a political act that you were even born here in the first place, because so many of us, we weren't supposed to be born here. We weren't supposed to grow up here, considering how that country fell apart. So it ends up right out the gate informing how you view everything. And it took me a long time to realize that other people don't see everything like that. And I think it helped me latch on to certain ideas and certain ways of storytelling very early on. I remember, for example, when I was in high school, when we learned about Animal Farm, in our English class, and then simultaneously in our history class, we were learning about the Russian Revolution and all that stuff that was happening, and Stalin and yada yada. But I remember being like, oh, you can write a story that's talking shit and criticizing this person that you don't like, and you can slip it in this metaphorical way where no one knows. And like, that's an important thing when your family is from Iran, because you can't come out and say that it's this thing. So the power of metaphor becomes really important in how you relate to stories and seeing subtext and stuff, and it just ends up being this like super fantastic, like intense training to be able to see that everywhere. Maybe a little bit paranoid sometimes as well, or maybe they didn't mean to write those stories in that way, but it really sparks your imagination in terms of being like, oh, okay, I can see that this is this, and this means this, and all that. So I'm actually very happy in this weird backwards way that it allowed me to become more creative as a result of that.
Yeah, I think something that's like really amazing about like when Esraa was saying like a commonality in our cultures, it's also like we love dance, we love music, we love like color. There's so much creativity within the MENA cultures that we don't get to see on screen. Like, again, Aladdin. But the live action Aladdin was this like really cool like celebration of like culture, and I was like my dad's not a musical guy, and I just was like, you have to watch it. And he's always so funny because whenever he watches like somebody, he's always like, maybe that actor's Persian. Like he's you know.
Oh yeah, we always do that.
Yeah, we do it anyway.
We know.
Like, you know when you're walking around, like you see two people like you like him, like you're like, but I think that's something because like I was saying, pre-transition, I wasn't necessarily like looking Middle Eastern, and like I was blonde, which also is funny because a lot of Persians get highlights anyway. But I was actually told by an acting teacher I can never play Middle Eastern. Like I cannot do that. And I just, even a writer and creator, I was like, oh, I can't write this person Persian, which if I have to write myself white, that then means if I have family, I cannot make them Middle Eastern. And I got to the point where I was like, fuck that, I do not care. Every single thing I write, somebody, mixed Persian, I don't care. They're always gonna be Persian, and like to specifically write that into, like you have to write it in because people will just be like, what? Unless you put like, not like, this is Middle Eastern. And making like our culture an important part of the story as well, so they can't like, cast or like take that away, which I know this is like a tangent to like a different part of the entertainment, but I would say like just that liveliness and like wanting to make things like fun and musical and like bring that in, because I'm working on a musical with someone as well, and it's just like there's so much life in our culture that I want to bring to the screen.
I'm getting tired of explaining to people who I am and what I am. I am not CNN. I don't need to go over my entire history. I want to be a person, right? I want to be like, not, oh, you're that Muslim person. I want to be, that's Jasmin. She's into this and this and that. And also, this is her background, like anybody else that we think of, right? You look at Brad Pitt, you're not going to sit here and look at his genealogy, nor analyze that when he goes to introduce himself into parts. So I think if we have that more inclusion and that representation in film, in media, that we can get past the basics, past the Middle East 101 or Islam 101, and get into the deeper, intricate parts, just like everybody else here has said, and show more of our culture, more of who we are, and bring on screen that we are people just like everybody else, and also that helps in the long run where people know that Middle Eastern people exist, that, they know that they can love this character past that. That's a lot of criticism I see as a huge Miss Marvel fan, that a lot of people think that this is Marvel being woke, or it's all about her religion or who she is. And it's not about that. She's so much more than that. And those who have gotten into Miss Marvel know that she's a big Marvel fangirl, right? And that they know her personality and relate to her personality. And that's all I wanted, is past the basics, get into who we are, and be a part of this world actively.
It's interesting. I saw this screenshot of like a Tumblr post on Instagram, and it was like something where it was like somebody was like, oh, people like conservatives are like, oh, media is so woke. There's a trans neurodivergent like biracial immigrant. Like they're just trying to be so woke, and the person was like, I am literally that. And it's kind of like, why is it woke that there's like a Pakistani Muslim? They exist.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them, And so it's just interesting that it's like, the more you deviate from cis-het white, like either no religion or Christian, it becomes like, oh, that's so woke and edgy, when it's like, we exist and we're not a monolith either. Like we all have like, yes, we're all Middle Eastern up here, but we're all such, like we can never play each other like in a show. And that's also a problem, is like the tokenization, where they're like, oh, here's one Middle Eastern. It's like, okay, well, does that represent every single Middle Eastern on the planet?
It's actually one of my favorite things, in the sense that I absolutely hate it, is watching people from different Arab countries play other Arabs. Like there's one Egyptian guy who's played an Iraqi terrorist and everything, and he doesn't do an Iraqi accent. He does it in his Egyptian accent. I'm like, that guy's hilarious, because they don't even, like, the people who wrote the movie haven't gone back and listened to what he's saying. They don't actually care what he's saying, and he's talking about like Egyptian movies. I'm like, who, like, how did they get away with this?
Not only that, but like the slang as well. So like just like every part of the United States, like you're from New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll say things like dead ass or bet, right? And in LA, you would say on God. And some of you guys are already lost. You're like, yeah, Jasmin, you already lost me.
We
But
do not say that.
I was like, I got a New Yorker here that can vouch. No, so just like different parts of the United States, or like even the South, where they go, oh, like, bless your heart, you know, like nobody says that in LA. But that's the Middle East as well. Every country has their own slang. Even from hi and how are you, you can automatically tell, just like you guys were saying, that somebody is instantly what country they're from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's funny that when and there's a lot of Middle Eastern people, right? I know there's only a few of us up here, but like we're a huge part of the world. You know, the adults can't stop fucking. There's too many children. So we take a huge part of the population. So when we do consume this media, I mean, it's kind of a slap in the face to see somebody like you said, like an Egyptian person playing an Iraqi person, but they're speaking Egyptian Arabic. It's like, you know, dead set, you are not Iraqi. And so that is just, it's not accurate. And like I said, we're trying to get past that point where we have the people that play their parts, and yeah.
If you have any Arab friends, I would highly recommend you watch Zero Dark 30 with them, because when I saw that in the movie theater, I was laughing, and everyone was like, oh no, like, why are you laughing? And it's because the actors, they're making vague Arab noises, right? But what they're talking about is, they're talking about like what they had for dinner. And it's amazing because no one did their research, no one bothered to check what these guys were saying. And it's so pathetic, because it's just like, even the people who are telling stories about us don't understand us. And I think that's what's so frustrating, because I look at this panel, I look at my people, I look at everyone I interact with, and like, we have such a love of not just theater, but humor and life, and it's like, it doesn't matter how bad it gets, as long as we're alive, we're laughing, even as grim as it is. And I'm like, how are you just going to like, why wouldn't you see that as a beautiful thing? But yeah.
I was laughing too, but it was the edibles. Going off of actually 2 points Jasmin say, I'm going to majorly ride on your coattails right now. But you had brought up earlier about you don't want to always be identified as just your race. You're like, okay, I'm a human being who's into comics or whatever, and I happen to be of Iraqi background. And one thing that I do want to bring up, which is hopefully a goal for all of us and that we'll see in the future with MENA people, is kind of the range of representation within a specific race, right? So we have American Jews, for example. You have shows like Transparent, which it was all about their Judaism, their relationship to Judaism. If I'm not mistaken, they had Orthodox people. It was about their religion. And then you have a show like Broad City, where the focal point of the show is not about their background, but it does come up sometimes in the story. For example, you go to a Shiva or something like that. And then you'll have a show like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or any show where, okay, the character happens to be Jewish, but it's brought up once and you don't really hear about that again. And so, not every story necessarily has to entail just all about our background. Sometimes it's just as powerful to take up space just as a person of an ethnic background, of your ethnic background, without mentioning it all. I mean, as a stand-up, I do a lot of, as a I'm sorry, did it turn off? I apologize. Okay, I'll just talk this way.
That's probably the end part of it.
Okay.
While you figure it out, I think another example.
As a stand-up,
There you go.
I do talk about my identity sometimes, but not all the time.
There you go.
And that's just as powerful, okay?
I was scared. He didn't want to.
Not all Middle Eastern women are like quiet.
Now it's a minute. Now it feels like home.
And the second point I wanted to make, Yas brought up the fact that,
Just keep yelling.
I think you can just talk. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yas brought up the fact that some stories stories are very tokenizing and only kind of represent one sect of, I think that's what you said, one part of society, of that culture. So for example, there's this new movie coming out that already came out called Persian Version. It's so cool, everyone has to go see it. It's an Iranian-American comedy. It's absolutely brilliant. And they do show, it's about the it's about the writer-director.
It's okay, guys.
We're used to it.
It's about the writer-director's background, and it basically showed the village, kind of a poor village in Shiraz where her family is from. And there was a little bit of backlash from some Persians saying, oh, but they only showed Iranians as villagers. They didn't show the metropolitan areas and da-da-da. To be completely honest, I think it's unfair to put that entire burden of all representation, of all parts of Iranian society, of all religions, of all cultures, on the back of one person. This is why we can't have tokenization. We just need more Middle Eastern creators to tell these different stories. Me, Yas, Kaveh, we don't come from necessarily the same background politically or whatever. I mean, all of us have a different story with our families, and all of us deserve to be heard. So if you want to go into creating a project, don't put that pressure on yourself to, oh my God, I have to represent everybody, because I used to be that way. Just focus on telling your own story. And the last point I'll bring up is the way we do that is community. I have, for example, something we have here, but there are a lot of MENA communities online, Muslim women in TV and film, Middle Eastern people in the arts. A way of connecting to other Middle Eastern people can perhaps, you guys can collaborate, you can help each other out, but if you know about each other, you can kind of bounce off of each other and, help each other tell each other's story. I mean, together we are stronger. We are not each other's competition, we are each other's collaborators.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Because I think it's that thing of like, it feels like we become a checkbox. Like, we got the diversity, and especially when you do get into that thing of okay, we'll make them trans and Persian, this thing, we got all the boxes. But the problem is that's just one person, and that burden then falls on that one person to tell a story, especially if you're the actor and everyone else was white in production. Because I know we've been talking a lot about visible representation, but representation behind the camera is it's hugely important, because we need those people who can advocate for us, who are telling the stories authentically. And I think part of that is just have more than one Middle Eastern person in the thing, you know what I mean? It's just you'll have the one, it's the 90s version of diversity, right? Where it's we have one, well, technically the 90s was we have a brunette, a redhead, but I feel for that, we're not a monolith, and that's the problem that becomes when we only have one person. And I feel that it's the same when we walk in a room. Especially if a lot of people haven't met a Middle Eastern person, we're that one person that has to represent our entire culture in that whole region of the world. But for me, I think when it comes, Sarah's absolutely right, we need to build up and support each other, but it's also an element of we need to be, white people just need to get out of the way. But I think it's that thing where we need to have just multiple, even in the same story, more than one person, but have them at the different points of production, pre, post, all that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, being a person who isn't in front of the camera, I'm an assistant director, it's kind of amazing what will not fly when they realize you're in the room. They kind of, we're used to policing ourselves, right? Everywhere we go, we're representing an entire, 10, 20 countries, an entire religion or whatever, but when you're in that room and they're about to make the stupid choice, it's kind of I see it all the time, where they just side-eye me and I'm nope. And they don't do it. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say too, I think we are working with a uniquely difficult set of circumstances culturally as well, because of both the culture in which we come from and also the fact that we're trying to exist within a culture of another race and religion and all that, where I can't speak for everybody across the Middle East, but I can say Iranians culturally tend to be extremely critical of each other. Not sure if you guys know this or not, but just go to an Iranian wedding and I go, talk to everybody the day after and see what they have to say. So it's not just in terms of like hire us and make sure that like we're in different positions. It's also, the onus is on us to be better and to be more understanding and more accepting, and that's frankly not intuitive for us. So that's a whole other battle that we're also fighting in addition to all the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd like to say, you know, as a stand-up, there has been kind of that movement of we are all not all the same person, we don't do all the same jokes. I mean, we all have something to say about our identities and growing up with immigrant parents, but everybody has a different story. And so it's really powerful to see some of these stand-up lineups with all that are specifically like all Iranian or all Middle Eastern or all Middle Eastern women, just to show that there is diversity in all of our stories.
Can I ask, Sarah, so when you are like on a show that is all Iranian or all Middle Eastern women, do you feel like you are kind of policing the content for your own community?
Policing as in like censoring myself?
Yeah, like do you think that, because to get representation, I feel like you have to kind of present the most sanitized version of yourself before you're allowed to be messy. In film anyway, that's what I see. So like stand-up I think is so much more immediate, and when you are working within a community, do you feel like there's a moment where you all kind of have to sit down and have a conversation about what you're going to say and what you're not going to say?
Usually, no. I mean, if you really are a professional stand-up, we've kind of moved past the hack jokes about, you know, I'm not going to call any joke out specifically, but the ones we've been hearing for 20 years. For example, a lot of Iranian Americans tell me, we like your stand-up because you're so vulgar, and you're like an Iranian woman, and you talk about sex, despite me not getting laid at all. But it's been a long time. But no, you know, it's really, actually, Esraa, we don't do that, and I think it speaks to something. It's very powerful to watch these all Middle Eastern lineups and just see how everyone can kind of go up there and hold their own and not necessarily have to repeat each other's jokes. Because like I said, we're all different, and yeah, everybody brings something new to the table.
I think that's wonderful. I feel like sometimes when I'm writing or I'm creating something, there is this like pressure to kind of to not be loud or messy or whatever, because we're performing for people who don't understand us.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about the like for Middle Eastern crowds.
Either way, because I think it's fantastic that you don't feel like you have to sanitize yourself for a Middle Eastern crowd. But I mean, do you feel like you have to present a different character for?
Well, I mean, you can't talk about sucking dick in front of Middle Eastern.
Depends on the crowd. Yeah.
You know, I mean, you could, but yeah, I mean, I think we know the community enough to. I mean, everyone, like I said, brings something new to the table. Now, as far as performing for non-Middle Eastern crowds, no, I don't feel like I have to sanitize myself. I feel like I can hold my own. I can talk a little bit about my identity and a little bit about fart jokes, I don't know, something that everyone can relate to. So they can learn, but they can also relate. So, does that answer it?
Yeah, it did. It's a good answer.
Okay. Reminding you who the real moderator is.
Sorry.
Only I can ask questions. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate that. What are some things that you have done or would like to do to contribute to MENA representation and raising awareness?
I'm a cosplayer, a content creator. I've hosted panels as well. I create panels circling around diversity for not just Middle Eastern, but all people of color, because we are rare in this industry altogether. And I'm making sure that with brands and big companies, so the ones that I love, Star Wars, Marvel, Disney, video games, that there is Middle Eastern representation and inclusion, and that we have a seat at the table and our voices are heard and our stories are amplified.
I feel like something I need to do is email the Academy Museum. But I think there's just small ways of doing it. So that was, I was telling them, a friend of mine works there and got us some tickets, and they had like the Oscar room, and they're like, oh, here's this like achievement, here's this historical thing. And I think it was 2018, I meant to research this before the panel, to double check, but I want to say Moonlight won that year, which was a big historic win. It's all black cast, that's fantastic. And then they mentioned a couple other historic things and then like random shit, and they did not put that Rami Malek was the first Arab American to win an Oscar. But I feel like it's those small things of like, you know, finding that and talking to people and starting those conversations. I know for me, it's writing in representation. That's something I really want to do more, because I think something that Sarah brought up earlier was the when comparing the different like Transparent and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Is like, I think there's that interesting balance of like, okay, like let's have a Middle Eastern story to show the culture, but like, what about an office comedy where someone's Middle Eastern or like trans? Like, like especially for trans stories, like, can we not have like trans trauma anymore? Same, like Middle Eastern, can we not have like the like, it's hard because those stories are important, but at the same time, like, it's not trauma porn for other people to watch. And so I think it's amplifying it, because I would love to like see, and something I saw Persian version and it was so great, and something I did love is they were in the city a little bit, or like a suburb, and it was pre-revolution Iran, and I was like, God, that's so powerful for people to see what Iran was like before the revolution, and to see, well, I was gonna say before the US fucked that up, but we fucked that up previously, because we did a lot. But yeah, and I think it's just being visible, especially like, I don't necessarily read Middle Eastern to people. I mean, I do a little bit more now, but my name is like Middle Eastern as fuck, so I can't like get past it. And so that's something where I'm like, I could choose to be like perceived as like fully white, but I choose not to be, because my parents like didn't give me a choice. But also, I always actively tell people, so that's like, I think my little way of doing it too, is I'm always just like, I'm Persian and trans, like everything is bam, here it is, so people know. Because it also flips the narrative on people too, because like, people will be like, well, you don't look Middle Eastern. I used to work in restaurants, so I couldn't say this to them, but I really want to be like, oh, is it because I don't look like a terrorist? But, yeah.
I guess showing up to panels like this is definitely one of the things that we can do, and being grateful to people for showing up in the first place and spreading whatever word you can, so thank you for that. I think for me personally, I've talked about this on panels before, the option to not make my cultural identity the center of what I write and perform or draw or whatever, and allowing that to be another okay option along with everybody else that's on this panel. I think, especially when I was younger, trying to either break into different schools or into the industry or trying to get noticed or into festivals, they really put a large emphasis on like, what's your cultural identity? What's your minority identity? What is this thing that you are? How do you, kind of like what you're talking about, like the trauma porn part of it, and how that is, on some level you're like, okay, well it seems well intentioned, but it ends up just being like only terrible, awful, like suffering stories. And it shapes how you think about the kinds of stories you want to write. And I think I had a point like a few years ago where I realized, I was like, yeah, I don't even really want to do that. That was never a thing I wanted to do in the first place. I just kind of wanted to make weird stories about like robots and aliens and draw stuff and have that be okay and have that be enough and have that be an example to, as you say, like other people would be like, oh, I could just do that, I guess. I don't necessarily have to do it. Again, also to what you guys were talking about earlier, all the options are available. It doesn't have to be this or that or that. You don't have to be a warrior. You don't have to be the person that's inserting this into every story. Although that's also cool and you're allowed to do that. You can also not do any of it if you don't want to. It's all of it and it's none of it at the same time. I remember somebody in San Diego asked us a question about how do I incorporate more of my identity into the work that I'm doing. And I was like, it's a false choice. Like, you don't have to think about it. It already exists within you. No matter what it is that you're writing or doing, it's gonna come through because it's who you are. It's not gonna be more Middle Eastern just because you have a character named Jamshid or something like that, you know? Like, that's not what makes it what it is. Your voice and your experiences and the way you view the world is unavoidable, and that's automatically gonna make it like that. And the people who understand that worldview, either because they're from there or they're sympathetic to it, will relate to it. And I think that's a really important thing that I feel like people don't think about as much.
Absolutely. I actually had one of my really good stand-up friends who's also Iranian, of Middle Eastern background, and she said, I was on a lineup with all these Middle Eastern comics and they were just so into their culture and I'm so whitewashed and I felt bad and I feel like I need to make my content more Middle Eastern. And I'm like, no, people can see through the bullshit. They can tell when you're not being authentic. You do you, be you, and that's enough.
Yeah, we don't have to always justify our existence. I think that gets.
Hey guys, we're being told to go.
Oh no.
I'm sorry, the other panel just needs.
Yeah.
No, you're just doing your job.
Yeah.
Do we have time for any questions? Like,
What time
You
is
guys
it?
can take questions outside as well.
Yeah, we're being kicked out. So
Okay,
let's.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate it.